The house stood at the edge of the forest, old timber creaking under the weight of time, its windows gazing out like tired eyes across the valley below. The man who lived there had once commanded legions. His voice had sent thousands into battle. His strategies had shaped the outcome of wars on worlds light years away. Now his days were quiet, marked only by the rhythm of his breath and the occasional wind that rattled the roof. He was a general without an army, a warrior without a war. His exile was chosen, but not without pain. Humanity had fought its share of battles, some won by sheer will, others survived by endurance. And when the last conflict had ended, he withdrew from a world that remembered his victories, but also the scars they cost. It was on one such night, when silence wrapped around the valley like a shroud, that the peace fractured. The sound came first as a distant whine, high-pitched, unnatural, cutting through the night. He rose from his chair, every instinct alert. It was not thunder, nor was it the roll of a distant storm. The pitch grew closer, sharper, until a flash tore the darkness, and something fell from the heavens with a trail of fire. The ground shook faintly, leaves shivered, and then came the silence again, deeper now, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He took his rifle, not because he feared, but because he had long learned that vigilance was a companion of survival. Through the forest he moved, each step measured, body remembering the discipline of decades past. He reached a clearing where the impact had torn the soil apart, smoke rising in thick plumes. Amidst twisted metal, a figure struggled, small, fragile, covered in ash and blood. It was not human. Large eyes blinked up at him, reflecting pain and fear. The skin shimmered faintly, pale and translucent, veins like rivers beneath a fragile surface. She was young, barely grown by her kind's measure, yet old enough to carry the weight of terror. He approached slowly, weapon lowered, voice steady, not unkind. She collapsed forward, too weak to resist, too wounded to flee. Without hesitation, he carried her back, every step heavy with the knowledge that whatever she was, whoever hunted her, would not be far behind. Inside the dim light of his cabin, he laid her on his cot. Her breath rattled, shallow, and her limbs trembled as though each heartbeat was borrowed. He cleaned her wounds with the same hands that once bandaged soldiers on fields far from home. She opened her mouth to speak, but the language was foreign, fractured tones spilling like broken glass. Still, he understood enough. Her voice carried desperation, plea, and the unyielding fear of pursuit. When the bleeding stopped and her breath steadied, she whispered in halting words, a name, a warning. The King. Her eyes widened as if the very title could summon him from the stars. He did not press her, not yet. Instead, he sat beside her, silent as she drifted into uneasy sleep. His gaze lingered on the fire, flames devouring wood with patient hunger. The galaxy had not seen Earth as a threat for centuries. Humans were scattered, fractured, too consumed by rebuilding their broken world to bother with galactic affairs. Yet something about this girl's arrival unsettled him. Kings do not chase without reason. Monarchs of empires do not hunt children unless the child carried something of worth, something dangerous. When morning light seeped through the cracks in the wooden walls, she woke. Her voice was steadier, her words clearer, though broken. She told him pieces of her story, each sentence like shards of mirror reflecting more than she intended. She had fled the court of the Galactic King, a ruler whose iron hand crushed entire systems beneath his will. She had been raised within his domain, but she carried knowledge that condemned her, a secret, a prophecy. It spoke of humanity, of Earth, of a people who would one day rise not by conquest, but by refusal to be broken. The King feared not the armies of man, but the endurance of their spirit. She had seen too much, heard what was not meant for her ears, and so she was marked for death. He listened in silence, not interrupting. When she faltered, he gave her water. When she trembled, he steadied her. And when she spoke of humanity as weak, fragile creatures undeserving of such fear, he finally answered. Weakness, he told her, was not measured by muscle or might. Humanity's gift was survival. They endured fire, famine, exile, and still rose again. They fought not because they loved war, but because survival demanded defiance. Empires crumbled, rulers fell, yet humans endured. That was what the King feared. Her eyes searched his face, confused. Why would he help her? Why risk his life for a stranger, a fugitive, one who belonged to the very empire that sought to crush his kind? He answered not with words but with action, tending again to her wounds, sharing his food, building the fire higher against the night. Compassion was foreign to her, but here, in this small cabin, she began to see its weight. That evening, silence pressed against the forest again. Birds ceased their calls. Leaves held still, as if the earth itself knew hunters move among the trees. He stood at the window, watching faint lights between trunks. They were methodical, precise, not the wandering glow of fireflies, but the deliberate sweep of searchers. He loaded his rifle. War, it seemed, had found him once more. The girl stirred in panic, recognizing the light, the patterns. They had come. His eyes did not waver. He had defended countless before, soldiers and civilians alike. One more would not be different. He told her to rest, to stay low, to trust. When darkness deepened, he walked the perimeter of his home, touching the ground, feeling its shape. The old instincts returned. He set traps with steady hands, moved obstacles into place, turned his quiet exile into a fortress. Every stone and tree became part of a plan. His mind worked not in panic, but in the cold precision of strategy honed by war. He remembered battles where numbers outweighed his forces 10-1, and still he carved victory from their arrogance. He knew these hunters would come with pride, with certainty of triumph. He would teach them what pride costs. Inside, the girl asked questions. Why fight for her? Why not hand her over and be done? He answered with a single truth. Survival was not enough if it meant surrendering what made one human. To protect, to resist, to stand even when alone, that was humanity's way. Her silence after his words spoke louder than argument. She was beginning to understand. The night stretched long, broken only by faint movements beyond the tree-line. His body remained tense, but his mind calm. He remembered comrades who had fallen, faces of those who believed in him, voices of those who trusted his orders. Their echoes gave him strength now. The girl watched him, and though fear remained in her eyes, something else began to grow beside it. Trust. The circle around the cabin closed with silent precision, armored figures moving like parts of a machine, each step in rhythm with the next. The king stood at the front, towering above his soldiers, his presence heavier than their weapons. His gaze pierced the wooden walls as if the man within were already defeated. Yet when the door opened, it was not surrender that emerged, but calm defiance. The human general stepped into morning air, shoulders squared, weapon in hand, his eyes unblinking as they met the king's. There was no tremor, no hesitation, only the weight of a man who had walked through wars and chosen still to stand. The king's voice rolled across the clearing, deep and cold, carrying command not only to his soldiers but to the ground itself. He demanded the girl. He offered terms, the illusion of mercy, the promise of swift death if she were returned. Behind him, 70 warriors shifted, eager for violence, certain their presence was enough to break one man. The general listened without interruption, then spoke with words that cut sharper than blades. He would not give her up. He owed the king nothing. The girl was under his roof, and as long as she drew breath there, she was his to protect. Silence followed, thick and unexpected. For the first time in memory, the king's command was met not with fear, but refusal. The king smiled then, but it was no smile of mirth. It was the curve of a predator amused that prey dare resist. He declared humanity fragile, unfit to stand against the tide of empire, a dying species that clung to myths of resilience. The general answered with measured certainty, describing humanity's truth. Fragile bodies perhaps, but unbroken spirits, minds sharpened by adversity, and hearts bound not by fear, but by loyalty. They fought because they must, endure because they refused surrender, and rose from ashes time and again. This was the difference. This was why humanity remained when greater empires had fallen. The words unsettled not the king, but the soldiers who listened, hearing defiance they had never been allowed to imagine. The king dismissed words with contempt and raised his hand. A squad advanced, their steps heavy, weapons drawn, their formation designed to crush resistance in a single movement. The general raised his rifle, But it was not blind fire that followed. Each shot was deliberate, each movement calculated. He did not fight them with strength, but with precision, with a knowledge of terrain and timing that turned one man into an army. Traps laid in the dark of night came alive, snapping into place, scattering armored figures into confusion. Smoke and sound disoriented them. Shots rang, blades clashed, and the forest swallowed screams. When the squad retreated, dragging wounded from the tree-lean, the king's face had tightened. 70 against 1, yet the one still stood. The girl inside the cabin trembled as she watched. She had grown under a rule where resistance meant death, where no one stood against a king and lived. Yet here was a man who not only resisted, but did so without fear. She whispered questions into the silence, asking why he would defy the inevitable. His answer was simple, delivered between breaths as he reloaded, calm even under threat, because surrender was a slow death, and survival without honor was no survival at all. She began to see a truth her people had never known, that strength was not obedience, but the courage to say no. The king, unwilling to accept humiliation, ordered the forest burned. Flames leapt, trees cracked, smoke billowed into the sky. The circle tightened again, this time with fury. The general moved through smoke as though it were his ally, each ember a cloak, each shadow a weapon. His strikes were swift, sudden, vanishing before response. The soldiers grew restless. Their pride suffered under the reality that one human could shame them so. The king shouted commands, forcing discipline where doubt began to creep. Yet the girls saw it. Some of their eyes shifted, some movements hesitated. The general was not only fighting, he was unraveling the king's hold on them, thread by thread. The night that followed was tense, the cabin surrounded, the forest scarred, the air heavy with smoke and the scent of burning. The girl asked him if he regretted it, if he feared that dawn would bring his end. He told her of battles where he had been outnumbered 10-1, where surrender was offered but never taken. Fear, he said, was natural, but it was what came after fear that mattered. Courage was not absence of fear, but mastery of it. She listened, and though her hands still shook, she began to believe. The king grew impatient. Another wave was sent, stronger, faster, determined to break through. But the general had prepared. He knew the land, every tree, every slope, every stone. He led them not into open fight, but into traps of their own arrogance. Their strength became weakness when spread too thin. Their discipline faltered when faced with the unexpected. They fell not to brute force, but to cunning. And when they staggered back once more, the king's pride was wounded deeper than any soldier's flesh. He stepped forward then, no longer willing to watch from the shadows of command. His voice cut the night like a blade, declaring that he would end the defiance himself. 70 had failed, but a king would not. His soldiers parted, forming a path, their gazes fixed not on the human but on their ruler, who moved with fury and certainty. The general stood ready, rifle in hand, body weary but unbowed. The girl's breath caught as she realized the storm had reached its center. The soldiers had failed. Now the king himself would fight, and the outcome would echo far beyond the forest, for in that moment the fate of a girl, the pride of a king, and the endurance of humanity collided.